Welcome to another of our VUCA learning experiences that we have developed in the context of the LEILA project. My name is Albert, and I'm in charge of introducing to you the Collaboration Barriers game. The overall learning experience will last approximately 1 hour. And in this learning experience, we are going to focus on 3 important objectives. The first one is to really understand the importance of effective collaborations in large, complex organizations, and particularly when we are working with people who are not belonging to our units, so when we are operating in cross-organizational or even cross kind of country type of context in which we have multiple stakeholders joining to take decisions together. The second objective is to help us understanding better where are the sources of resistance when it comes to have professionals collaborate effectively. And the third one is about identifying barriers in our organization which might prevent us to collaborate effectively, and discuss a number of action and management levers which can be put in place in order to address these challenges and help the organization to collaborate in a more effective way. So why are these 3 objectives so relevant? We can start by looking into the relationship between high performance and collaboration in organizations. And what I can share with you is that over the last approximately a few years, since 2010, in large global organizations, we have observed a very clear trend. Until more or less 2010, the trend was towards decentralization. That means the idea was to create lean organizations where individually and autonomously the different part of the organization would be able to operate. But since 2010, companies have started, if you want, rediscovering the value of collaboration. They have started realizing that in order to reach higher performance levels, it is not enough to just sum the performance of the individual units, for instance, to look at innovation, value created, or organizational excellence, operational excellence, but to reach higher level of performance, it is important to reconnect people. Now, over the last decades, people have learned to work in silos with very specific KPIs, that means performance indicators, which were very local. Therefore, our organizations have in some way lost the capability to create synergies, make knowledge flow efficiently, and basically what companies are realizing is that if they want to really exploit collective intelligence of all the people in the organization, as well as also be able to kind of do more with less, which is what many organizations are trying to achieve, or even kind of leverage the diversity, for instance, for innovation, and the variety of people within the organization, then it is time to change the culture in order to reach a higher level of collaborative performance. This is a very interesting trend, and I can tell you, we'll discuss this later, that this change is not at all easy, because a number of habits have installed themselves in organization, which makes it hard to make the organization change to become again more collaborative, with the capability of every individual to collaborate across silo to provide their best knowledge and their best support to all those who need it. Now, let's look at a very specific case you might be familiar with. I want to bring you back to the situation of 9/11. And from the perspective we have discussed right now, look at the role of the FBI. So let's move a little bit larger. I think you remember very well the 9/11 terrorist attack in New York City. Now, let's look at the role of the Federal Bureau of Investigations in trying to prevent such an event. As many modern organizations, at the beginning of the second millennium, the FBI promotes independence of their managers and officers. Exactly as we said before, delegation of power has got also an economic reason, as it allows to have a light central infrastructure. So we have seen even FBI has gone through these decentralization kind of trends. Therefore, actually, if we continue to look into this particular case, the house rules of the FBI foster the empowerment of field officers and high incentives on their performance using metrics such as number of arrests, indictment, and convictions. You see, local type of measurements. In this structure, individual cases were assigned to a specific field office. Overall, we have 56 field offices which are scattered around the United States and have the control and the responsibility on internal security issues. So you see, effectively, they have been able to realize a highly decentralized organization with very local incentives too. Now, the great advantage of such a decentralized system is to have clear lines of responsibility set and to guarantee a great deal of accountability, as well as to keep managers' motivation to perform at their best high and not being distracted or influenced by centralized control. Yes, this whole movement came from the fact that locally people were perceiving that the headquarters was imposing too many constraints on them, bureaucracy, and influence. Therefore, the trend before 2010, although before the year 2000, was fully towards decentralization. Still, despite the agile organization put in place, the amount of information and sources to be checked out is considerable for each field office. So they started realizing how actually the different tasks were already becoming too challenging for every individual unit. Therefore, in order to simplify the work of the analysts and of the field agents, as well as to prevent legal issues, criminal cases are kept separated by intelligence-related ones, and strict formal procedures for informal distributions are in place for respecting the privacy of citizenship and for accountability reasons. Actually, transgression of these rules could bring to criminal, civil, and internal administrative sanctions. So we see we have a number of rules in place which also kind of clarify what are some of the walls, some of the barriers, the information, for instance, which has to be kept separated. And these, as you might know, created a number of problems when it came to the 9/11 terrorist attack. Now, let's start reflecting a little bit about this situation. Besides the clear advantages of a lean structure, because that's what FBI had as the one FBI implemented until 9/11, nobody at FBI was able to prevent concretely the incoming disaster, despite some elements started to emerge in the local field offices as well as in other US intelligence community agency. So it's not that analyzing the case afterwards, one could have not been able to prevent, perhaps, the attack. But the information and how it was managed and scattered would not allow, in the current structure, to do it effectively. So we want to address a number of issues related to this case, which are the risks related to the FBI structure, as it was until 2000, more or less, and more in general, what are the risks of decentralizations, and to which extent, in the case of FBI, the behavior of the different agents, of the employees, and their attitude towards collaboration might have played a critical role in preventing FBI to be able to kind of address this challenge. The second question, which is critical, that we want to ask is, which are the collaboration barriers which have made FBI unable to perform as expected in preventing the attacks? So we'll engage into a deep analysis of what are the collaboration barriers which played a role. And we'll finally reflect on which are the changes that an organization like FBI would have to introduce in order to gain or regain the capability to work collaboratively when addressing global threats. Great. Now, we have seen until now how collaboration provides actually, particularly in the last years, great opportunities to reach higher performance levels. Obviously, in the commercial world, performance means economic success. In other words, like the words of law enforcement of FBI, performance means being able to use all the information sources and analyze the situation in order to then support decisions and actions to prevent, for instance, attacks to happen. The second thing we have seen is that in certain cases, exactly like in the 9/11 case, the capability to collaborate, the competence to collaborate organization-wide can become really critical if we want to deliver a certain level of performance, particularly if we are operating in complex and global contexts. Now, when we talk about collaboration and introducing a collaborative culture, it sounds easy, but actually all the experiences of organizations who have tried to re-inject collaborative behaviors have encountered a number of resistance factors. So let's review quickly some of these resistance factors which might prevent companies to be as collaborative as they would actually want. The first point here is that often people don't see any real advantage to collaborate. Sometimes we think we don't need other people, we can do everything on our own. Second, many of us have a belief that the cost of collaboration will outweigh the benefits to their own organization of themselves. So we see ourselves in a collaboration relationship where we give more than we take back. So we find it is not worth our time. Third, concerned that the collaboration will take over a major area of the organization or individual's work. So we don't want to be overwhelmed by collaboration because we have our own tasks and we protect these. Another key reason that we find in many organizations is the lack of trust. Collaboration requires trust because we are passing over knowledge and we want to be sure that this knowledge will be used appropriately, or we share knowledge and we expect reciprocity. If we don't have trust, obviously we will not engage in this. Other people mention in different studies previous collaboration experiences which were negative as the reason for resisting to move more in this direction. Or there are other cases where the culture of the organization or of a subgroup of the organization does simply not encourage sharing information and resources. This might be a historic reason, and therefore the culture has to be addressed. And even worse, in certain cases, we have observed how people do not want to collaborate because they assume the superiority of their own culture, of their own subgroup, or are trying to attempt their own culture on other subgroups. Okay, you can think that some people in the organization look down to others and therefore say, I don't want to collaborate with these other persons. So you see many different reasons which have been studied, and in general, as you know, change tends to be hard because if we start from a situation where our organization is highly decentralized and not really able to collaborate, we will have to move individuals as well as the whole organizations through these different steps. As you know, these are the 4 basic steps of change. Every change only starts when we become aware of the need for changing. So the need for changing, the why for changing. And what we have done until now was in some way motivating to show how becoming more collaborative organization-wide and even inter-organizationally is one of the future key to high performance. And we would never be able to reach such high performance without adopting such practice. Now, once we are aware, we still need to be convinced. In some way, we have to understand that the new way of operating, the collaborative way of operating, doesn't conflict, doesn't go against our own interest, because otherwise people do not have enough motivation to engage in a change process, change their attitudes, change their behavior. Once we have been able to convince them of the value of doing these, we can move over to other stages in change, namely, provide to the organization the possibility to experiment, to try out, to allocate time to engage in these new behaviors, new forms of working together. And if this phase is supported by enough support, then we might see in many organizations the adoption of a truly collaborative kind of culture, and the agility which would enable them to address even complex global type of situations. So, as you have seen, I just wanted to warn you that although collaboration is key, it can be very challenging to introduce it. And I also wanted to kind of remind you of the very big importance of being able to identify the collaboration barriers which exists at the individual level or at the organizational level, and to address them in order to increase your own organization's performance. Now, thank God we have a recent research study which will help us in gaining many more insights on collaboration barriers. This research study has been based on the analysis of a very large number of organizations operating in many different domains. And what emerged from this study are 4 main categories of collaboration barriers. That means all the collaboration barriers which have been identified in this study, it was possible to cluster them, to classify in 4 main categories. Okay? And then for each category there are different specific collaboration barriers. So altogether in this study 14 different collaboration barriers were identified. And the idea is that by studying, by understanding these collaboration barriers, first of all, we become aware of barriers which are very frequent in organizations, and these might help us to identify which were the key barriers in the case of the 9/11 of FBI, and also in the case of ourselves, which is what we want to trigger a reflection about ourselves and how we can improve. Now, we could simply present you the results of the research study, but we're going to try to achieve these in a playful way, as we are doing throughout the LEILA project. Playful means that we are not going to give the model, but we are going to give you the template, the empty model. You see here in the center there are 4 categories, but you will have to identify what are these 4 categories. How? By selecting from a long list of possibilities that we have prepared for you. Some of them are the right 4, some of them are not really categories, some of them do not fit at all. But it will be your task to identify which are the 4 categories of collaboration barriers which were identified in this study. Now, let me show you what are the 3 challenges, because identify the 4 categories is just the first of the challenge. Once you will have identified the first category, our game will continue, and you will be challenged to identify the specific categories which are related to human factors. That means collaboration barriers which emerge from the behavior and the attitude of people. Once we will have clarified which are the specific collaboration barriers related to human factor, you will have a third challenge, which is the one of, again, picking from the list of possible options, identify the 7 most frequent collaboration barriers which are not so depending on the behavior of individuals, but more on organizational structures, systems, and culture. So if we go through these 3 challenges, at the end we are going to have gained a good understanding of the big categories of collaboration barriers, and we will have been able to review a number and identify a number of very specific collaboration barriers, some of which might or not apply to yourself. As we will see, they all apply to understand the FBI case. And for sure, as the study tells us, these are among the most frequent collaboration barriers we can find in large organizations. Great! Do you feel ready to start with the next step? As you have probably understood, your first task will be to identify from this list the 4 categories. This will be task number 1. Once you will have completed these, you will have the 4 categories, and you will move to step 2, namely identify the ones which are a function of human factors, and third, you will identify in the next step all the collaboration barriers which are critical when it comes to organizational factors. So, best luck for the next step. It will take approximately 30 minutes, but feel free to take the time you need, particularly in reflecting about your organization when trying to identify which are the most relevant and the most frequent collaboration barriers. Best wishes!